Singer-songwriter, poet, humorist, and cartoonist David Berman, best known for his musical work under the moniker Silver Jews, passed away suddenly on August 7th, 2019. I've been calling David the, quote, best lyricist I've come across, end quote, since my early 20s. Beyond his writing, David was a person who I generally held in the highest creative regard, his various works having shaped me in many ways over the past 20 years. His death prompted me to dig through my personal archives a bit, and while doing so, I found a 36-minute recording of an interview I had conducted with David for NPR in 2008 when he was 41 and I was 28, a lifetime ago. And now, before I play my interview with David, I'm going to read a piece I wrote about him after his passing. It's called Place Past the Blues, and here it is. The gist is that me and a friend had driven down to Nashville to wander around for a couple of days. We planned to drink, listen to music, and eventually go see Will Oldham play a show. This was right around the time the Silver Jews record, Tanglewood Numbers, was released, and I was still buzzing hard on the Jews' prior record, The Great Bright Flight. So me and my friend are sitting out in front of the venue about 2 hours before the doors open for the Bonnie Prince Billy show, baking in the dry sun. No one else was around as I remember it, just the sun. Then suddenly everything turned to slow motion as a red pickup truck with the skylight pulled up and parked about 13 feet away from our little perch. More than a free throw, but less than a three. I could smell the cigarette smoke immediately. It felt intimate. Inside was one of Will's oldest friends, David Berman, with his big glasses and his Tennessee Titans rearview mirror air freshener. There he was, the Silver Jew himself. This was after his suicide attempt, but also during a semi-healthy period in which David was believed to be sober. Adjacent to that, however, was his refusal to take medication for his severe depressive state. At least that's the information I had heard. I watched David sit in that truck and try with everything he had to find the will to open the door and step out. He must have fought for 15 minutes before he put his head down on the steering wheel. I imagine that steering wheel was very warm, or even hot, but he held it there for minutes. Suddenly he sat up, fixed his proud comb over, cranked the ignition, and calmly drove away. Maybe he forgot something at home. Perhaps he picked the wrong pair of boots. Or maybe he just wasn't strong enough in the moment to do what he wanted, or at least needed, to do. After he drove off, my friend turned to me and said, "Do you think he saw us?" I didn't laugh because the moment felt too melancholic. A few hours passed and we drank. I kept a wide eye out for David all night long at the venue, but he never surfaced. My friend and I gulped down a bathtub's worth of hams, saw a very strange Will Oldham set, then went back to the hotel bar, where a guitar was getting passed around. Anyone could play, so my friend grabbed it and attempted to do something that sounded like music. He was too drunk and not yet a good enough player to do much more than make the people of Nashville laugh. Just as my friend finished up his Andy Kaufman impression, Will Oldham and some of his friends appeared in the doorway. I couldn't tell if David was in his entourage or not, though I do clearly recall the silhouette of a tall guy in a trucker hat. Before Will could get both feet through the doorway, before I could see who was with him, my friend barks out, "Will!" with a ham's-kissed grin, his arms raised and ready for a hug. Will stops, whispers to one of his friends, then turns around and leaves. Soon after that, I blacked out, and I think my friend did too. But we had made it to our room, and I woke up the next day on the floor, just in time to check out. No vomit, a hazy memory, a puffy face. I was young enough to believe I'd have countless days as memorable as the one I had just drank my way through. So it's not much of a story, really, but those few minutes watching David Berman bake away in his truck, smelling him, hoping for him, deepened my bond with his work and his perceived character to a degree unmatched by any other personal hero of mine. His terrible, beautiful singing voice. His ability to say in one page what most folks can't manage in 20. The confessional quality of everything he did. The bravery, and our shared inability to skip through life. I ended up interviewing David 4 times for various publications in the decade that followed the Will Oldham show. While bullshitting about football before the 3rd interview, I finally told him the truck story. He just laughed and said, "Sounds believable." But now he's dead. Suicide in a Brooklyn apartment. I wonder if it's my old one. I wonder why he was in Brooklyn. I wonder how his wife feels. But for now, I'd prefer to focus on the words and hopefully have dreams that take place in an alternate reality in which he's still around and I can talk to him 4 more times. I'd rather focus on the Purple Mountains record he released just weeks before his death. It's the best record I've heard in many years. It's one of the best records I've ever heard. It's the kind of collection I'll play in my lowest moments to remind myself that yes, in fact, sometimes very beautiful things do happen, and all you gotta do is be around for them. That's a tall task these days. On that note, I'll close with the Silver Jews lyric that feels different today than it did a week ago, when David was alive. It goes like this. I asked a painter why the roads are colored black. He said, "Steve, it's because people leave and no highway can bring them back." And now here's the interview from 2008 for NPR. Me and David Berman.
We're joined today by Nashville-based singer-songwriter David Berman. David's band, the Silver Jews, have a brand new album out called Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea, released by Drag City Records on June 17th. My name is Greg Locke. I'm the managing editor of What's Up and music critic for Nuvo. David, thanks for taking the time today to talk with us.
Greg, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. You're speaking to us today from Nashville, is that right?
Yes, I'm sitting in my living room.
From a listener's standpoint, it appears that you've had an upswing in your personal outlook over the last couple of years. At least that's what I would get from your music. Is the name of your new album meant to be any sort of personal declaration, or is it maybe just like a pun about your vision problems, or even something else?
Well, it sounds like to me, first of all, like a pun on the address Lookout Mountain, Tennessee.
Okay.
And after that, there is the language about sight and seeing, and having had the cornea transplant on the language level, that's going on. And then you're correct again. My mood has been very good the last year or two. And when people tend to be happier, they have an interest in the world around them, and so it is outward looking, look out. And the music that I'd written up to this album, I got a real dose of it by touring. The first time I'd really played any of my songs, because for the first 12 years of recording, I finished this album when the day it came out, I never heard the song again. And so this is the first time I wrote an album after having listened to what I'd done up to then. And so compensation happens, and you sort of recalibrate, and I could tell that was something that was going to change.
And just for our listeners' sake, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Silver Jews, for their first 4 albums, didn't ever tour, and had your first tour after Tanglewood Numbers just a couple years ago.
After the 5th album came out.
Yeah. And I'd been a fan since American Water, I think probably just due to my age. I hadn't even heard of you before then, and worked my way, and just stuck with you. So when you announced that tour, I was really excited. I went up to Ann Arbor and caught that show, and
it was kind of a one-time historical event type deal. Because there just aren't that many people who the music that we play, that I listen to, that forms the canon of post-punk music, really privileges live performance above all, and that's what's real. And by holding back from that, it was a big change to go out and to be a performer for the first time. And I'm glad that I'm glad that it worked out this way. Just from an artistic point of view, I think it gave me time to develop in a way that people who develop their, let's say, songwriting on stage in public never get a chance to do, because they're like funded with affirmation from the very beginning, even their sketches, and so kind of working with myself and learning revision, and then releasing stuff but not really getting any feedback besides some reviews, which were not necessarily, that wasn't the best way to find out, to learn about my own music. And so going out and doing those shows just made me a more informed, and when I started to write this record, I was subsequently more communicative and less demonstrative, more intent on clarity, and also using more, I'd say, narrative techniques to dramatize themes that really are the same old themes that I usually work with. But the albums are kind of like theories, and I purposely don't release singles or EPs in between, and they're all very alike in a certain way, and just sort of they build on each other. They don't change that much. They're just sort of me at different ages, and this one sort of, to me, kind of fulfills some of the. This one really caps off the other 5, and it seems like it brings everything around again, sort of like facing the audience, having just kind of come out of the audience. I was thinking today, country musicians always talk about coming out of a small town, and like I came out of the audience. I was like a music fan for, I don't know, almost 10 years before I ever wrote a song. and I always kept that perspective, but at the same time, I stopped paying attention to who the audience was, and the audience got younger over time. I didn't notice. I couldn't really see, and that comes back to my eye and goes back to the title.
Yeah, I noticed at the show that I went at that there were a lot of people who seemed to be maybe 21 or 22, and I was pretty surprised by that. But and to our listeners who aren't really super familiar, you have 6 albums. I'm pretty sure they all have 10 songs except for maybe the first one. They all have kind of a lot of trademarks or hallmarks to them that from album to album, but also they do definitely feel like a natural progression to anyone familiar with the albums. And the new album is, the only word I could think of to use would be adventurous. It just feels like a lot of fun, and there was some of that on the last album too. And in comparison to Bright Flight, which had its moments that were also kind of fun, like Let's Not Say We Did.
Yeah.
But the new album as a whole, just in general, kind of just feels adventurous. And I was wondering how much of that has to do with, again, I might be mistaken, but I think this is the first time that you've had a lot of core musicians around that you've toured with and then recorded with. And how much does that play into the recording of this album?
Well, they are a jolly bunch, and the songs are what they are when I bring them in, but we practice them for maybe 7 or 8 3-hour practices before we go in, and we did the basic tracking, all like we always do live in a room, and that's the best and easiest part, like usually 4 or 5 songs a day, and then you go on to the overdubs and the mixing, which takes me or the band forever. But there's it's a happy scene, I think, in the recording studio. So as far as that variable is concerned, the band is influential. But of course, the songs are being written for like months before they even hear it, and they acquire these sort of foundational aspects. And I think that the adventurousness also could be accounted for by the fact that making the last album and going on tour was a challenge I set up for myself. And when I did it, it took a lot of pressure off me.
Really?
And so I am more relaxed, or I was more relaxed, because I had sort of set up this quest for myself so I could be the own hero of my own life, I guess. Go out and do this thing. And hopefully, it'll force a second act in my life. I look forward to like, I always thought of rock musicians as they age as being sort of stuck in this permanent first act.
Sure.
And the other players get younger or stay the same age, and they age.
Yeah.
It's like this horrible play. And I definitely want to have, I think the arc should start here. So setting that up, I'm not pleased with myself or in bliss or anything, but I think in writing the album, I felt really good and knew I was sort of doing. It's the first time I liked doing the work itself,
And I can't remember if I read this in your press kit that came out or somewhere else, but I think I read somewhere that either you or your label or someone said that this is their favorite Silver Jews album. Do you feel that way about this album?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Definitely. It's the one I worked the hardest on, and the one I have the least. There's always things that, there's always weak points on the record, and this one has the least for me. And I don't know. Sometimes you never listen to them again. This one I haven't listened to it in a couple months, but I want to listen to it, and I know I liked playing the songs.
Yeah, they do sound like songs that more so than your other albums, I guess. Songs that would be fun to play live and fun to play out, So, you said we had a email interview that you finished up for me right when you got back from a European tour. just recently, and in that interview you said that The Natural Bridge, looking back, your second album, was kind of the big one for you, almost like a bridge in your career for you personally.
Yeah.
And a little history on that album, at least from how I understand it, was that you started to do it with a group of musicians, and then you maybe started with the second group, and then did you scrap it all and just start over again? Is that how it happened?
Yes, it was a case of being unsure of what to do, and I wasn't taking I wasn't strong enough to make it happen, and so I kind of collapsed and then kind of tried again.
Okay.
Almost collapsed again, but finally pushed through and was able to make it. So it was, I think growing up I was always, I never tried very hard. I was sort of what you would call a quitter. I really needed to show myself something by that age. I was in my late 20s, actually. And I really needed to justify my existence. And so it was an unusual record in that I remember getting through it, and I consider it having been a real test, but I don't want to listen to it, or maybe now it's far enough away. But I had insomnia during the whole time in the worst way, where I was up for days and days, and like I had somehow psyched myself out of the ability to sleep.
Oh, wow.
And it was in Hartford, Connecticut. It was very gray, and I remember it was like my third night. I hadn't been able to sleep, and we were driving to the studio, which was in this Colt 45 warehouse that used to be a gun factory. And there was this giant semi-truck that was blocking the middle of the road. It was stuck, sort of trying to turn around, and it was one of, I don't know if the company still exists, Guaranteed Overnight Delivery, and it just said G-O-D, and it was blocking our way, and I just knew I've been trying so hard to get through the record, and I just knew this was a sign to give up, but I pushed through, getting by even that.
Well, you say you haven't listened to that album in a while, and I can tell you that it holds up really well. I really like the writing on that album. That was the first one that the writing just really started to set in with me, and that's kind of a thing about your writing, is that it's not something that you can just pick up an album and just get the lyrics right away. You kind of have to get to know them. So I worked at record stores for a while, and we would play Bright Flight and American Water in the stores a lot, and people would ask about it, and just trying to explain it to people, why it meant so much to me, at least personally. I would always end up just going back to the words, the actual writing, and I mean that's mostly that's your real background, is writing. You went to grad school, I think, at UMass.
Yeah, I was in
a writing
grad
program
school when I was starting to write that record. I did it after.
Okay.
Right after there, but I was really attentive to poetry at that point. That's what I was writing and studying, and so I was real interested in just collecting images, and I was interested in economical words and phrases, and I think that I was living in New England, and I'd never lived there before, and it was very, very, it was a very inspiring place. There were bookstores everywhere. There was, I would walk by Emily Dickinson's house every day.
Wow.
It was also kind of spooky. Massachusetts was to me, kind of like there was a Stephen King vibe to it, or H.P. Lovecraft. But so I think back on when I think of that album, I think of the East Coast.
And just continuing with the theme of writing, you released a collection of creative writing and poetry in 1999 called Actual Air. It was very well received, and I believe it's actually in its 6th or 7th printing already. And you had mentioned in the previous interview that I'd mentioned that you have one, maybe even 2 books coming out this year. Is that right?
Well, not this year, but that I'm working on.
Oh, that you're working on. And are these similar collections, or?
Well, there's a book of drawings that I'm doing.
Okay.
And there's this other book that I'm planning out, considering writing, and it would be more in the lines of autobiography.
Okay.
But as far as a follow-up book of poetry, I haven't really thought of a good enough reason to put out another book. Like, I think that, anyone should put out a first book, but I think there should be a real good reason for a second one.
Okay.
And I'm not so sure that any other book of poems I put out wouldn't be just Actual Air too. And also, I kind of feel like I read poets sometimes today who, to me, are better at doing what I was doing then, now. So I would leave it up to them too.
You'd mentioned that you have a book of illustrations, and that's another thing that you do is illustrations, and you'd also mentioned your writing being economical, and really in a lot of ways I think a lot of what you do is considers that not a lot of waste, and definitely with your illustrations they're
concise.
They're very concise. Yeah, and I love them. Me and my girlfriend we still look at the ones in the American Water booklet, and now in this press kit that you sent out, there's some new ones in there, and we're bummed every time you put out an album that doesn't have those in them. So we were pretty excited about like
Good.
Oklahoma and the Sky Over Oklahoma and all this new stuff. But I thought I'd heard that you had a exhibit or an exhibition in New York City or something.
Well, it was a group show of like
okay.
illustrations that were kind of like doodles, but there was a weird mixture of people. It was David Berman, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Henry Darger, Kenneth Koch, some dead people, some alive people. There were like a lot of. I had a couple different drawings. One called Spring Break Hitlers, and one called Lou Reed Prays to a Zebra. And there were actually 18 different ones in the show. But
back before Tanglewood was released, I had always kind of wondered what you were up to, or just in general how you spent your time. And nowadays it seems like you're really busy with all the things we've already mentioned. And then also last year there was a documentary film called Silver Jew. Yeah. And I had been emailing I don't know if they're the directors or producers, 2 guys. I'd been emailing and bugging them about it, wondering when I was going to be able to see it without traveling like out of state. This was a sort of a tour documentary, I guess.
Right.
Could you tell me a little bit about it, and I guess even specifically if someone like me who lives in Indiana and doesn't really have more than 2 art house screens, if I'll be able to see it eventually.
Yeah. Well, Drag City is putting it out actually.
Okay, good.
And it's sort of the first thing that Silver Jew's thing that's ever come out that I really don't have anything to do with, to the extent where I have never even seen it, and purposely, I don't know, a lot of reasons, but I had some friends watch it for me, and I asked them to look for certain things and vet it for me and make sure I wasn't saying too much. that I don't believe, or that places where I may be contradicting myself or exaggerating. But and they sort of gave it the thumbs up, and I I knew that this camera was following me. This 3 days we were in Israel, and I was meeting new people all the time, and when you're doing that, you're speaking off the cuff, and you repeat yourself a lot, and you do maybe say some things simplistically, and not knowing when the camera was around or when it was on. There was just one guy with a camera. It was very subtle, and I had to just sort of not think about it, and I didn't. And so I thought any footage edited out of that, if I was to see it, I think that I would object to it. And I thought then I won't let it come out, and that would be maybe a bad thing. And so people said, no, you should let it come out, because said, there's some things about it that are unusual, and so even just for being unique, you should let it come out. And one of the things that they said was, well, it sort of builds towards this scene where I was at the Western Wall, and these Hasidic Lubavitchers, two Hasidic Jews, they go around and ask Jewish males if they're Jewish. If you say yes, they'll have you put on the tefillin, which is a leather strap that goes around the arm and around the forehead, and then say the Shema, this prayer that Jews are supposed to say a couple times a day. And so that's happening, and I'm reading the prayer from this sheet they've given me, and I guess I got very choked up, and so you can see me crying in the movie, and that was the thing that made me say, okay, well, put it out, because it's so rare that you see anyone, an artist that maybe that's so personal, that putting out is so counterintuitive, that I knew it was exactly the right thing to do, just instinctually. So it's like 52 minutes. It's not a picture of the tour at all in a broad way. It's just the days we were in Israel in the middle of the tour, and we played 2 shows, and we've kind of walked around Jerusalem, and it's very minor thing. I was hoping that Drag City would sell it for as little as you can possibly sell a thing.
I want to ask you again about your press kit, and I've already asked you about this in our previous email. You sent out a press kit to the media with information about the songs, illustrations, other various things, and then also I want to say maybe 10 different writers writing about the album that they'd been listening to. So were these people obviously had the album before the music media or the radio stations or anyone else? Are these writer friends of yours, or how did you choose who to send the album to and then ask them to write about it?
Well, this is how I did it. I know one person who named Eli, who's an editor at McSweeney's, and he knows a lot of writers. I don't really have any friends that are writers, and I don't know any of those guys. But I asked him, could you pick some 10 or 12 names that he thought were people who would be interested in just listening to the record and then responding, with a couple hundred words, and take the challenge of trying to write an imaginative review, like assuming that acknowledging that everybody knows that rock music reviews are extremely conservative, and they sort of follow the same pattern. I thought, well, here's a way to maybe encourage a critic who gets this press package to try something different. And so I think 6 of the guys wrote something, and I didn't know any of them, and they sent them in. I'm not necessarily sure I really even liked what they said, but at that point I knew that was beside the point, that it's just that there were 6 different ways of writing about it, and some people who've received it, I think, take it as an insult, some critics, but it's really just a great amount of information. I thought if I threw 100 facts out there, then all the reviews wouldn't be the same 3 facts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I first got the press kit, I try not to read other people's reviews before I review an album.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of worried that I would have to read this to properly review it, but then once I finished, I would,
They weren't really reviews.
No, not exactly right. They're more like someone sat down after listening to the album and
responses.
Yeah, responses. There you go. Yeah, and just you'd kind of said that you thought that the music media has gotten pretty poor lately, and we interviewed Will Oldham a week or so ago, and he kind of echoed that. The way that he put out his latest album, he basically announced that it was coming out 2 weeks before it came out, and the media, everybody got it on the same day that wanted it, and he did that, I guess, probably for a lot of the same reasons as that you did this, and that's that reviewers get these albums and then it's like a chore. They'll listen to it once or twice, and they'll all say, like you were saying, the same 3 things, and then write some filler stuff. So
yeah, it's frustrating. And the other thing is I don't think very many people want to speak about it because people want to please and be people don't want to be seen as raining on the big internet parade or something. Everybody wants to be one of the cool kids. It doesn't pay to insult rock critics.
Okay, and I have one more thing I just wanted to ask you about. This is kind of indulgent of me to ask about, but I had asked you about this in another interview also, and that's the Bright Flight album. Is one that it's probably become my favorite record of yours. And when I interviewed Bonnie Prince Billy, we were just kind of talking, and I told him that you said something to the effect of that being not the dud, but I can't remember what word you used.
The weakling of the litter.
The weakling of the litter, yeah. And he said that was his favorite, and I told him that it was my favorite also. And if for me, someone who doesn't know you outside of your albums, really, to me that seems like it was a big album, or an album that came at a big point in your life, I think.
Well, the fact is that Will and I have the opposite taste all the time. Each of us regards the other one as having some pretty flawed taste in other people's music, but we do like each other's music. But,
have you heard his new album yet?
Yeah.
It's
really great. We were recording them at the same time, down the street from each other.
Really? Yeah, you said that he comes to Nashville quite often and stays with you a lot, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you can think of that we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about? Or?
Just that I have a soft spot in my heart for Hoosiers.
You do?
Especially those of the Southern Indiana version. And I have no sympathy for Colts fans, so I don't know what the crossover is there with Southern Indiana. There might be some Titans fans there. Who knows?
Yeah, I would think so.
I doubt it. Some Bengals fans maybe. But anyway, Peyton Manning, intolerable. And there's people here in Tennessee who actually root for the Colts when they play the Titans because of Peyton Manning. That Peyton Manning takes precedence over a team that just happens to play in the same state. That's how retarded East Tennessee is, though.
What part of Nashville do you live in? Are you in East Nashville or?
Yeah, it's East Nashville. It's called Inglewood, and it's kind of a little. East Nashville is kind of a little north of Nashville, really.
I've heard a lot of people talk about East Nashville. Of course, Todd Snyder had that album East Nashville Skyline, and
Yeah.
we have a guy coming to Fort Wayne here named Tommy Womack, who's from East Nashville, and
Yeah.
he seems like a really cool guy.
Yeah.
I think Eve Barzilay from Clemson, I'm pretty sure that he moved to.
Yeah, people like to distinguish East Nashville. It's just, I guess, there's just not as much wealth on the east side. That's really the difference. It's not that the whole west side is like that, but that's where, that's where the downtown is. But that's also where the Vanderbilt area is, and the commerce. And so this East Nashville is a little more run down, but it's also that much more gentrified. And it's just little houses, old houses, but they're not as expensive as the rest of the town.
Yeah, I have a friend who goes to Nashville quite a bit for work and for music-related things, and I was asking him about East Nashville and kind of doing research for the Tommy Womack thing that I wrote, and he said to me that East Nashville is, for people like him, whatever that means, East Nashville is hipper than Brooklyn.
It's Nashville. It's not hip, I swear. I promise. It's corny.
It's corny. Yeah.
But Nashville's version of hip is way corny by New York standards. But I'm sure that's called hyperbole. It's how someone expresses enthusiasm.
Yeah. A friend and I had driven down to Nashville to see Will Oldham a few years ago, and we didn't really know what we were in for, I guess. And we stopped and we parked the car and we're walking around and we realized that we didn't have a camera and we wish we had a camera. And then this car drives by and this woman throws her phone out of the window and it lands right in front of us. We pick up this cell phone and we take it to the show and we're like taking pictures with it all night and sending them to ourselves. And
unbelievable.
We got it back to her. We got the phone back to her, but like Will did a kind of like a posed prom picture with us, and
that's great.
That was our Nashville experience. The next morning we walked around I guess what would be kind of the touristy area.
Yeah.
And man, we got out of there as quick as we could. I guess the sense of history is interesting to someone from Indiana, but it just seemed almost like a movie set.
Yeah. Well, the downtown Lower Broad, the bands start playing there at 10 a.m. and they play till 3 p.m. And Second Avenue is more commercialized, but the old honky tonks are, the music's pretty great. There's no cover. There's always they're just playing for tips. Some of the best musicians in the world, and it's not quite as just sort of blatant as maybe Beale Street or as I hate these city fun zones that they try to create with laws. It's how they get all the people in one place so the cops can police them, and but it makes everybody drive drunk to get home. They don't have neighborhood bars anymore. So anyway, I love it. Nashville, really the greatest. But I don't want it to become like Austin, so I don't really want anyone to know.
Okay. Well, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this.
Greg, thank you very much, and thank everybody who works on it. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Good luck with the rest of your year and the upcoming tour and the release of the album.
Yeah. I really appreciate talking to someone who's familiar with the stuff. I really don't take that lightly after a lot of these conversations.
I think I probably know your songs better than you would be comfortable with. So
I'm sure you probably know a lot of them better than I do.
Yeah, I think actually when I saw you perform, I think you had a book of lyrics that you were kind of reading and checking.
Yeah, definitely. I know. I'm always looking into the audience and trying to read their lips.
Yeah, that was one thing about the show was that, and maybe it's because you hadn't toured, but all these people were such big fans that everybody knew the words. Like every single person around me knew every word.
That helps. Helps me.
It probably helps, but doesn't it creep you out a little bit?
Oh, yeah. I don't notice it. I mean, that's got to be like the people in the front. Those are the only really faces that you can really see, and they're all sweet. I've been getting off the stage a lot more and like kind of walking down in the middle of the singing because I put the guitar down because I sprained my thumb, and so I had to do more of a Dean Martin type thing. And good, it gives you a chance to break that wall down that musicians are really so secretly pleased with keeping up.
Yeah, I've been to that's really cool that you do that. I've been to 3 Sonic Youth shows, and every single one I've had Thurston Moore like walk by and bump into me while he's taking pictures of the opening band. And that's
it's
what I
weird
talk
how
about.
people before the show, you really can walk around. People don't want to bother you. Some people will come up and say something. People are really show, but after the show, they feel like they've been through something with you, and people are just they want to give you a hug. It's to me that's great. I don't mind going. I like to go out and talk to people because I'm not jaded about it. I mean, I said to this one audience that other bands, they come to this town and they say they love you, and I'm sure they do. But when I say I love you, it's new. It's a new kind of love. They're just they've loved a lot of towns before for many years. It's just between us is fresh, and so that's true, really.
Okay, well, thanks again. Sorry to derail for a minute there, listeners.
No problem.
Again, Mountain Lookout Sea is now out in record stores, released by Drag City, so go pick that up. Thanks again, David.
Thanks, Greg.
Yep, bye.
Bye-bye.
My name is Johnny Camarado. This piece is called Lines from a Men's Room Wall for David Berman. Making dates you don't want to keep to avoid too much sleep. You've learned to crawl out of the ooze to find a better way to lose. Always back timing, medication to get the optimum vacation from yourself. Trying hard not to point out that all the people preaching reincarnation are always furthest from the tracks at the subway station. I don't need much from you, and you won't get much from me. I'm as uplifting as a punctured raft at sea. You're pre-defeated, the world's still new. I'm as crusty as over-sniffed glue. Scanning through an encyclopedia of social media, hoping for a singular commonality, but all I find is a river of banality. So I stared at the walls so hard they stared back as I pondered all the qualities that I lack. I swallowed the big pink pill, and now I'm too far gone to pick up the dead fly from the windowsill. And all you wanted was Netflix and chill. But my TV's been dead since before you were born. I got a radio with the knobs all worn. It's perfect for blasting sonic porn. They tell me it's better to dodge the bullet than swallow the barrel, which brings to mind old Jim Carroll and his fragmented advice. You ask me how and why I hurt. Maybe it's because you took my shirt to sleep with in lieu of me when you rented that castle down by the sea. Had we worked, we'd be watching this rain, how you love to perch on that window pane, your bony knees pressed against your mosquito-bite breast, for me, a no-hope chest. Trapped in the bardo between too old for brass knuckles and too young not to chuckle at the thought of still breaking heads. But it's dawn that breaks instead, and I'm not smart enough to heed the warning words of the morning birds. The distance from adore to abhor is far less than that of a ship to shore, and clearly I'm keeping score. Now I lay dying on my bed, the ghost of you curled round my head. Nothing more to sing or say, just hoping I somehow beat the one big cliche.